Claire's like 95% towards wanting to get a law degree. I'm like 20%. Christine makes it sound so fun. It sounds so great.
No, it's true. Welcome back to the Life After Caltech podcast. I'm Claire Ellison, a junior at Caltech, and my co-host is
Mason Smith, Page House alum, class of 2009, and current Caltech trustee. Our guest today is Christine Woodin, Page House class of 2010. She majored in applied and computational math, but now works as a patent litigator. She helps translate complex technology for judges and juries, but she still says that nothing in her job has been harder than Caltech problem sets.
If you've ever wondered how your technical skills could open unexpected doors, this one is for you. Here's our interview with Christine. Very nice to have you on the podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name's Christine Woodin. I am a lawyer, which is somewhat unusual. I graduated Caltech in 2010. My major was applied and computational math. I went to law school immediately, graduated law school in 2013, and then have been a lawyer ever since, starting out in patent litigation, which is kind of a more traditional route for someone with a science or technical degree. And then now I do still probably 50% patent work, but general high-stakes commercial litigation. And I guess I should mention my husband. I met my husband at Caltech. He graduated the year before in 2009, also with an ACM degree.
I am super interested in your path. When did you know you wanted to be a lawyer, like in Caltech, or maybe you knew before?
No, definitely not before. So I wouldn't say I so much as decided I wanted to be a lawyer as discovered law school was another option. I was pretty sure. I majored in ACM, did some research over the summers, which I think is, what a lot of people do through SURF or other programs. At Caltech, you meet a lot of people who are really passionate about research and really passionate about what they want to do afterwards. And I think that helps distinguish when you don't find something like that. There's lots of stuff that I did that I was interested in, but nothing that I felt like I wanted to get a PhD in. And then I also didn't want to go into finance, mostly because my now husband was going into finance and other people were doing those jobs. And there was something about it that didn't seem unique or interesting to me. And I took a law class. I don't know if it's still this way, but at the time, because the humanities department is so small, the main law class was taught by the dean of USC Law. McCaffrey was his name. And I really liked it and had come across, I think, somebody who had a similar background and had gone to law school. And I essentially took a practice LSAT and then told him fall of my junior year, or maybe even later, I'm thinking about applying to law school next year. What do you think? And it kind of took off from there. So that was how I stumbled into it, I would say. I think that ultimately it was a really good fit for me. Like, I've been very happy in this career, but it wasn't a case of starting out at Caltech and being like, I want to be a lawyer. In fact, if someone was applying to Caltech and was like, my goal is to be a patent lawyer, I'd be like, well, this is not the correct path then, if that's what you want to do. Go get a technical degree somewhere, get into the best law school you can, but it doesn't necessarily make sense to start out that way.
So you would say you started considering law school the summer after your sophomore year?
No, I think it was later. You apply senior year. So I think it must have been fall of junior year. So I guess not that far off of what you said, but it was definitely like after junior year is when I took the first law class, maybe that spring. And then I decided over the summer I'd apply. So very close to, when I needed to get applications in. I took the LSAT December of my senior year. So I was kind of like almost the latest that you can possibly apply.
So you were a major in ACM. Did any of that knowledge or experience, do you feel like it helps you in your career now? And if so, how?
I think the experience overall definitely does. I don't have a patent case where it's like the technology is directly ACM related. But by the same token, someone I work with who might have a chemical engineering degree isn't going to have a patent case that's like exactly the stuff that they studied either. Mostly it's not being afraid of learning some new science. And at Caltech, you're put in a position where you're taking a lot of classes in science that's new and maybe outside your comfort zone or things that you find difficult. And so far, at least, I haven't come across any patents that are more difficult than anything that I did at Caltech. And so I think that mostly having that comfort and ability to learn something new and be willing to learn something new has been helpful in my job. And nowadays, technology comes up in all kinds of cases, not just patent cases. You work with experts on the details. It's not like you have to be a PhD in the technology that you're litigating or that you're working on. But you have to be willing to learn it and think about the legal arguments that go around. And in that sense, being willing to sort of learn something new, the Caltech background was helpful. I think the only thing I actually specifically used is I have had cases very early on where I was actually like reading source code for infringement or non-infringement reads. So like we're making arguments based on actual source code. People find that very intimidating if they've never done any coding. But if you've done even a little bit, it, I think, helps and you're able to figure it out. And again, we have experts to do it, but it's helpful for the lawyers to be able to do it too.
Is there like a clear point where you kind of get enough background in a subject? Like, is there some clear point that happens? You just kind of keep learning and hope that it's enough right until the day of the case?
I think you're always learning throughout it. I've talked about this with some of my like colleagues that have done this for a long time. I do feel like patents eventually click for me. Like you need it to kind of click because eventually you're going to have to explain it to either a judge or a jury, and they definitely aren't going to understand the details. And a lot of times these things are written and they're just like these really long technical descriptions. I have a case right now that's about spinal implants. And that's like a mechanical engineering case, technically. The way that they describe the device, it's like a top surface and another surface. And that's not that technical, but it's still very hard to visualize. There is a moment, I think, where it clicks and you understand like what the key issue is. And there have been other cases where I don't know that I knew as much as the expert did. I mean, I never get to the point where I truly know as much as the expert did. You're kind of always learning, but when we're close to trial and like when we're working with the experts on everything, you hope that you know it pretty well.
How much knowledge do you need to know to present it? What is the knowledge threshold that you need to like actually give this information to the judge? Because there's no way you have to know like every single thing. Like, so what are you trying to convey? What's like the overall?
Yeah, without making you guys take an entire course on patent law in this in this podcast, when you have a patent, it's supposed to describe an invention. So like the whole deal is that you tell the government or the USPTO, I have this invention, I'm going to disclose it. And in exchange, I get a monopoly because monopolies are generally not allowed. That sounds very like nice in theory, like, oh, this makes sense. It's pretty easy to define. But like in practice, what they end up being is they're defined by what we call claims. A lot of times we use analogies like if it was a real property case, it'd be a property line. But instead it's like, I have invented this thing. It's easiest to think about it with like the spinal implant where it's like an actual object. I've invented this widget. These are the features. And for someone to infringe my invention, I have to prove that, generally speaking, all of the features, all of the listed things in my claim are in their product. They can have other things. Like if I invent a car with 4 wheels and a windshield, they add wings or, an engine somewhere else. They can't, that's not how you get around a patent. But they have to have all the things that I list. But also all of the things that I list, when you take them together, there can't have been something before that had all those because then my invention isn't new. So there's a lot of other defenses, but typically when we get to trial, if we're representing the plaintiff, we're having an expert come up who's going to say, look, I looked at the source code for this. So if it's a tech case, or in the case of my spinal implants, I'm like a doctor or a mechanical engineer who designs these products. And like, look, it does have this kind of wall and this kind of wall and this kind of notch. Or I looked at the code and it is true that, when packets come in, these specific steps happen as described in the patent. And then on the flip side, if you're the defendant, you're saying, I don't do one of those steps, or you're saying like it's all obvious because it came before. And we're literally doing this. Usually it's like a question and answer with an expert, and a PowerPoint is typically, sometimes we use physical devices and you're trying to convince a jury. So you need to know it pretty well. The expert is typically the one explaining, but you need to know what questions to ask and you need to know how to kind of rebut what the other side's going to say. And then you have to work with the expert to come up with, this is one of my favorite parts, is like working on the kind of graphics and the way that you actually describe these things to a jury. This is very complicated. I had a lot of cases about like the cellular standards. This is a point where you're asking like, how much do you need to understand? I can tell you a lot about the 4G and 5G cellular standards. I don't know that I like truly in my brain, Mason, I don't know that it's clicked exactly how data is put on a radio wave, even though I have litigated that all sorts of ways, but it's mostly about like the very specifics of how the bits are allocated and mapped and stuff is what there are patents on.
Do you have multiple cases at a time, and how long do cases take?
So it varies. But I think as I've gotten more senior, I typically am on more cases because we staff things like I think like you'd see across industries. It's sort of almost like a pyramid a little bit. Like we'll have more junior people whose more of their time is allocated to an individual case. And then when you're a little bit more senior and running things, you're on the top of multiple cases. Well, right now, my workload, not as much of my workload as patent. It's even more complicated, but I'm probably on between 6 and 10 cases. Depends on how you count. But I'm only on maybe 2.5 patent cases. When I was a junior associate and was like much, much closer to the technology, like first starting out, I would typically only be on 1 or 2 cases at a time. It would be much more like a lot of my time to really dig into one specific technology area. I think it does vary a lot across the type of case, how complicated it is, and then maybe even how different law firms choose to sort of staff our teams.
Is a junior person the person who like does a lot of the research and then provides it to a senior person to present it, or do junior people also present in the courtroom?
Because that sounds like the fun part, right? No, it is the fun part, but it's very nerve-wracking. I put on my first witness when I was like a 4th-year associate, and she was an expert, and that's probably pretty early. Like I think at some law firms you wouldn't be because also keep in mind a lot of cases don't go to trial. Like I'm telling you about trial because it's the fun part and it's the part that explains the case. But a lot of times parties decide there's a lot of money on the line. It makes a little bit more sense to like settle this and not have a jury decide it. It's also very expensive to go to trial. So you work your way up. It starts with working really closely with experts, of being what we call second chair. So you might be the one that really knows the material well, and you've worked on prep very closely with the person presenting, and are kind of making sure that all of our ducks are in a row, and that it gets very technical, like getting everything into evidence. Like one of the things I think I like about like trial and also like in general the law is like it is this sort of interesting thing where there are a lot of rules that you kind of have to like follow and work your way through to prove your case or defend it, as the case may be. The first things I did were you take depositions first. That's not in a courtroom. It's now we do it over Zoom a bunch, but it's typically you're asking the questions to sort of suss out someone's opinions or like figure out information. And you kind of work your way up to presenting witnesses at actual trials.
So, like, as you're getting more senior, it sounds like you're covering more cases at once and you're actually presenting them all.
You can't be in trial and 2 cases at once, right? Like, none of my cases are staged well, if it happens, then I'm not going to both. But like you're not at that point in multiple cases at any given time. I haven't been to trial in a couple years. For a while, I was averaging like 1 or 2 a year, but like 1 year had 3 and then 1 year had 0, like that. So it's kind of really depends on the time frame. I think an interesting thing about this career, and it depends on what area of the law you go into, but like what I'm doing, if anything, like the job gets more stressful in certain ways as you get more senior. And then my boss is like the one who's opening. So he has to like talk to the jury and be like, we're going to prove all this stuff and tie it all together at the end. He'll also present witnesses. That's sort of the progression of things. And people more senior to me are working on dozens of cases.
So you're doing like 1 or 2 cases a year, and each of those you're spending like a year or more like getting ready for them, right? So that's like super stressful by the time you actually get to court.
Yeah. By the time you get to trial, you've devoted kind of years of your life to the subject matter. You do a lot of repeat technology. Like typically people specialize. One thing I like about what I do now is that I think this is also what drove me to kind of law in the first place, is I liked that I was doing different types of technology, like different patent cases. And now I do non-patent cases. And that's also interesting because it's still so much involves technology nowadays. And I tend to gravitate towards those kind of cases, but it's also new areas of the law, which is interesting.
What's the longest case that you prepped for, but didn't actually go to trial for, that you just had to like settle right before or something?
I mean, that happens more often than you'd think. It's also like how much time and energy. Like last summer, I had a case and we'd only had it for a year, but we were hired to basically take over it because they had lost another patent case. And they thought this one was the harder case, bigger exposure, all of this stuff. And we went all the way to Delaware. We were like the day before picking the jury, and the case ended up settling. And the fall before, I had a big antitrust case where the same thing happened. We were the plaintiff in that one. That does happen frequently. I'm thinking like what's the longest I worked on a case that settled? I was like quote unquote lucky at the beginning, and a lot of times my cases didn't settle, which is why I got trial experience early. Now it's probably only a couple years, like a year. I would say maybe a year and a half or 2. But I know of a case I had friends working on, a client that I used to work for, where it was filed in 2014 and it settled on the eve of trial in February of this year.
So, like, you're in a case, like, we're in this process of, like, settling something with the judge, with the jury. What does this middle ground mean for the members involved with the patent? Like, can they use the patent? Can they not? Like, is there an advantage to them being in this middle ground?
Yeah. So when I say settled, like on the eve of trial, that's like the private agreement. A judge could be involved in that process, but typically not. I think for someone who owns a patent, it really depends. Like, I have had cases where it's almost like individuals or very small companies that have the patents. Trial is a big risk for them too, right? Because a jury could say that patent isn't infringed. Well, that's not so bad. Maybe there's someone else that they think is infringing on their technology. But, if this is like a competitor case, it could mean like, oh, we thought our competitor was using our technology and that's why we were losing sales. Jury says no. Now we've spent all this money and, we're not going to get what we wanted out of it, which is like money or an order from the court that the other side has to stop using it. But the other thing that can happen is your defense is literally like your patent is invalid. If a jury decides a patent is invalid and that's like upheld on appeal, they can't ever assert that patent against anyone else. So whether a patent is infringed is specific to whatever product they're accusing. If I sue you and say you're using my patent and a judge says no, I could still go sue Mason if he has some other product I think is using it. But if the judge or jury says it's invalid, then, now the patent is dead, so to speak.
This period of like 2014 to now, were there any limitations on them using this patent?
So the plaintiff can always use their own patent. But for the person they're suing, if you wanted to keep them from using the patent while the case was pending, you have to move for something called a preliminary injunction. And that is the standard for that's very high. You need to say like, it's so likely I'm going to succeed. And also I'm going to face like irreparable sales harm or like my business is going to get destroyed in the pendency of this case. So you need to stop the sales now. It's relatively unusual for courts to award preliminary injunctions. Actually, where you see it happening is typically in pharmaceutical cases. Sometimes someone with a pharmaceutical patent will move on a generic product where they have a very easy infringement argument, and then they argue that a generic entry is going to destroy their market share. But even there, usually if the harm that happens while the case is pending can be remedied with money, then courts typically don't grant injunctions, because the idea is if you can be made whole with just money, you don't need the stop order.
This is very insightful. I have learned a lot.
Are you considering a career in law now?
Please, I don't believe in my public speaking skills.
I will say it's interesting to go to law school because I went with this sort of Caltech background of like, I think I'm going to be interested in this. I took some classes that I liked, but I didn't ever do moot court or mocks or anything. I'm just like not someone who wanted to do public speaking or enjoyed public speaking. And I remember actually I was lucky and went to trial very early on. I obviously didn't have a speaking role. I was like 4 months in, I like barely passed the bar, and was doing prep with some of the experts. And one of the partners said something like, oh, this case only has a couple witnesses. There's not going to be an opportunity for you to do anything, but you'll be great. And I remember having a moment where I was like, I don't know how much I want to do this. It seems very stressful. But I have found that it's one of sort of the fun parts of the job, though for me, it's still always very stressful and nerve-wracking. And it's not like I like went into this because I love moot court. You're doing this podcast, like oral argument in front of judges is actually oddly similar. It's like a question and answer session where you need to know your stuff. You're answering the questions. You're not asking judges questions. That's frowned upon. And then the jury presentation it's not giving a speech. So, for me, that was not like the end goal, even though that's the type of lawyer I ended up being. There are lots of lawyers, even in the patent world, who do what we call transactional work that doesn't involve courts. It's sort of a funny result when I did go to law school with people who obviously have been doing mock trials since they were in middle school, and their whole goal was to stand up in court, which you don't get to do for years.
Did you consider like the types of law where you don't have to go to trial at all? Like if you were kind of nervous about that, or what? You weren't initially excited about that? So my first, law school does like summer internships very similarly. Like just like you would do in undergrad, but it's a little more formal. My first summer, I did a internship in what's called patent prosecution, which is confusing because prosecution
is usually used in the criminal context, but in the patent world, it means getting patents with the patent office. It's the sort of classic transactional version. You communicate with the USPTO largely over email. Now there's like a branch of it that's a little bit, there is like a quote unquote trial, but that didn't exist at the time I was in law school. And it's still like people who do true patent prosecutions aren't doing. They're writing patents and then they're trying to get them granted. I thought I would love it. I was like, oh, you hear about new technology, right? You like write patents. But I think it actually was everything that I was kind of nervous going into CS would have been. Like you kind of just sit there and have to get a certain number of things done. And it's not like team-based at all. There's parts of it that were interesting, but it felt very isolating. It might have also been like what I was doing and sort of surprisingly boring. And so that's what made me decide to do litigation the second summer, which is a little bit more collaborative and has a little bit more of a personal element to it than that side. But some people love it.
I'm learning how many different types of lawyers there are. Like maybe I will be a lawyer.
Yeah. Take the LSAT, some logic games. It's fun.
That's what I'm saying. I think I would take the LSAT. So who knows? Open up a different opportunity. Who wants to be a scientist anyways?
So you basically like decided summer after junior year that you wanted to be a lawyer, and then you had to take the LSAT. That's so little time to consider a pretty huge shift in careers.
You don't know what you're doing, right? I mean, I think that's the thing. It sounds crazy now because it feels like such a shift. But at the time, I was just trying to figure out, should I be applying to finance jobs? I think by that point, I briefly had considered switching my major to CS, but it was a little late. And so I didn't want to do that. And I took this law class and was like, maybe I'll try taking the LSAT this summer unless I love the summer of research or I have some other change of heart that makes me want to try to go to grad school. In that context, it felt less crazy because it was more trying to explore a variety of options. Ended up taking the LSAT twice. I took it in September and December. So I think I took it the end of the summer without really studying as much and then felt like I could get a slightly better score. So took it once more before finalizing my applications.
Did you do slightly better?
Yeah.
This is amazing. I'm wondering, when you were doing applications, did you only apply to law school? Did you also consider going for your PhD?
So I only applied to law school. I think by that point, I had decided I was set. During the summer, I was less sure. I took the LSAT. And this was in my senior year when I was doing this in the applications. And by that point, I decided there wasn't something that made me want to apply to a PhD program. Looking back, it does feel a little bit impulsive in a way, but I had this sort of vague backup plans of I can go to the career fair. There are these jobs I can try to apply to if, this doesn't work out or I change my mind. But once I had decided, it was a little oh, well, now I have a plan. I'm going to go and I'm going to do more school. I know how to do school. We'll see how it is.
I guess that's a benefit at the time. It feels like it's more school. And at that point, oh, I know school.
And the thought of sort of just applying for jobs, it can be very intimidating, especially because I feel like everyone I knew was either firmly in, and I guess, for you, Claire, I know it's very different now. My class had something there was 15 people or 20 people in this computer science major, and I knew several of them. And, those jobs made sense. You apply to whatever, Meta or Facebook at the time or Google, and you're trying to get a programmer job. And then I knew people going into finance, which is what my husband, then boyfriend, was at a small trading company that year, kind of working crazy hours, which maybe that partially dissuaded me from it. I was like, oh, I'm not going to go to Virtu, and which is where he was working. I think it was less intimidating to be okay, I'm going to go to school. I mean, the intimidating part was I knew I was taking on loans, but I'm going to go to more school. A lot of people like the law path because I think there is sort of a clear, defined, and then you go be a lawyer at a big firm and that's how you pay off your loans. And sort of there is sort of a comfort to that versus all the uncertainty of what else I was going to do after college.
I do like the idea of stepping stones. From what you're saying with lawyer, and from what I understand for it, there is very clear steps and very clear ways to move up, which is very appealing.
I will just, say, because I know I'm making it sound very fun and I do really like my job. McCaffrey, this USC law professor, I don't know why he was teaching law and technology at Caltech. He was really helpful. I remember I was I'm going to apply to schools in California. And he was what's your LSAT score? What's your GPA? And he was no, you're going to apply to these schools, like the top like 10 or 20 schools. And he was like, it matters a lot. You can't just like go to whatever California school you get into. And I didn't have any of that context. I didn't have like, parents who were lawyers, or I hadn't been planning to do this for many years. The stepping stones I'm talking about, I also did end up going to like a very good law school where there was good career services who like helped you along the way in a way that maybe my experience wouldn't have been the same if I had just gone, wherever I got in California.
Do you think like if like you have a current Caltech student like and they did want to pivot to law school, how like behind would they be? Like what are the concerns? Because it does matter. I mean, being in a top law school does at least appear to be a big thing. So how
Yeah. No, if it was someone pre-college and like you were like, my heart is set on being a lawyer, Caltech wouldn't make a lot of sense. That said, if you are a current Caltech law student, well, you can feel free to reach out to me if people are listening to this. But like, I do think that pivot, for me at least, I had like learned how to work hard. Was able to leverage like technology skills long term. The pivot wasn't necessarily like hard for me. In a lot of ways, I think law school was easier than friends I had who went to maybe schools where the undergraduate experience was easier. Because for me, like the difficulties at Caltech where you can be working on something and you feel like you're never going to understand it or never going to finish it. Like law school's a lot of work, but it's like reading cases and like learning things and memorizing them. Time always solves it. And not nearly as much time as like an all-nighter on a problem set. And so I think the transition to law school was, if anything, easier for me coming from Caltech. But it can be harder to get into law school and all of this stuff because, it's not like you went to, I don't want to like disparage other schools, but like the fact is it's going to be harder to have a really high GPA at Caltech, like just statistically. And you might have a very good LSAT score, but you haven't been in like a pre-law program, right? Like you're really shifting the type of work and learning you're doing. And at least for me, I found the background to be very useful. But there are other people who, have their sights set on this and they're doing moot court all the time and taking pre-law classes before they even get there.
Is there anything that, like, on the flip side, like going to another school, besides probably easier to get a higher GPA or more opportunity to take more relevant classes if you go to like another school and that you have pre-law in mind? But is there anything else like kind of skill-wise or something that like, if you're thinking about doing law, even though they're at Caltech now, like there's something they could do now, even though they're at Caltech, that would make them a little more prepared?
Yeah, it's
besides transferring, but
I was gonna be like, no, the high GPA. Yeah, besides transferring, no. I think the one sort of skill that you definitely are probably not developing at Caltech is writing, which can be a huge part, at least, of litigation. So like for us, when you start out, like you might be getting into the technology like I was talking about on a patent case, but typical assignments will be like legal research. That's a skill you learn in law school, but I think especially in this day and age, it's like effective Googling and time commitment. I'm not Googling, we have like law databases, but writing is like a big portion of our job, like writing good briefs. Like part of your job is to persuade judges through writing early on. Obviously, when we get to a jury trial, it's different. And that's something like I had done I took like the science, right? I think I'd maybe written a little bit in these law classes and I took whatever required writing you have to take your senior year. And when I think on my early reviews, I would get reviews sometimes that were like, no, you're great, you're smart, you're like thinking about everything correctly. Like the constructive criticism I typically got was about writing. And it's like my writing is, I would say even now, my writing's fine. My writing might even be good, but I just like, some people's writing is like actually beautiful. And the other thing is like other lawyers love that, right? Like I might write a brief and I'm like, does the job, like totally convincing, lays out the arguments really well. But like sometimes people actually like do it very prettily. And that's a skill. But I think all the other skills you have probably outweigh that one. You're talking about like what might be lacking. That's definitely what I would put my finger on. And maybe public speaking. Like when do you, I don't know, there's also when you take the writing class, you have to take like the presentation class, or at least you used to.
Yeah.
Probably the only time I did anything like that at Caltech.
Do you still have, I assume that's still a requirement, right, Claire? The oral presentation class?
I believe so, yes. Yes, it is.
Oh, so you haven't taken it yet?
I have not. I think it's reserved only for like seniors. So I'm not even allowed to get that out of the way. Stuck in my math and science classes. So I guess, I don't know. Public speaking, I don't even know if that would be freedom. Yeah, it would. I don't want to do sets. I think I would take it any day. I'm personally just really interested in like learning about like being a lawyer. I don't know if that would be my path, but I don't know. I think the ability to have really good public speaking is just something, it's just so cool. I think it's so important. Question that I ask most of the people on the podcast is, do you engage with the Caltech community at all?
Yeah, well, I mentioned I married another techer, so technically I engage on a daily basis with the Caltech. I have, I would say I'm medium involved. My husband played basketball, and he still likes to go back for like the alumni stuff, and feels very strongly about supporting the basketball program. And then the other sort of, I guess, not necessarily relevant to my time at Caltech, is my parents actually went to Caltech, and so in some sense, there's a, I guess I talk to them and they're alumni, but I think that there's sort of a cultural, I don't know, feeling. We're like proud of it, I guess, for lack. And then, funnily enough, my law firm also represents Caltech, which is fun for me, but I've worked on very little Caltech stuff.
Do you specifically avoid it, or do they not?
If you got a practice case, I would be I would be thrilled. They've hired other law firms. They've done some offensive patent work. My firm is not who they had for that, in part because our patent group was a lot smaller then. They defended Caltech in some cases where it's like a whistleblower case. I think one of them went to trial. It was filed by one of the professors, basically like you're misusing funds, that kind of thing. Or maybe the one that went to trial wasn't that. But yeah. And some of my like partners talk about, like the professors that they worked with and like what good witnesses they were in these trials, and like how cool the science that they're working on is.
I think that's a really cool interaction that I would not have thought of. But I guess that is. That's so cool. I think being a lawyer is really cool. I don't know if I've said that enough.
You talk to like a second-year associate who's like dying working, and they might be a little...
Yeah, that's true.
We work a lot, but it is fun. It's interesting. I've been happy with it.
How long is the process? I guess it's like a process where you're always stepping up, but you said that you were a fourth-year associate?
And typically, especially if you go to like the large law firms, there's big laws, like what people call it. It's sort of an interesting, especially for a group of lawyers, it feels like a little bit like price fixing. All of the first through seventh year associates typically have a salary scale, and everyone's paid the same in major markets like in California, New York, but like Texas too. And then there's different law firms might like fall off of that scale. And I think lawyers love to be hierarchical about everything. So they're like, oh, these are the ones that are kind of like top of the market versus, and the trade-offs are at the largest law firms where you're on this salary scale and you're being paid, sort of, and you're stepping up through it. You typically work a lot more than you would if you took sort of like a pay cut to what people might say like a little better lifestyle or something like that. And so when I use fourth year associate, people use the years out from law school to bench how senior you are. So a first year associate is somebody who graduated, well, it gets a little confusing in the fall. You're a first year associate for like a year and a half, or you're like a 0th year, I guess, in the fall, because you take the bar after you graduate sometime in the summer. You either clerk for a judge, but that doesn't change our sort of seniority. So like if someone clerks for a judge for a year, they still come in with their class. So like it's basically all done by class. So I'm the class of 2013. So in 2017, I was a fourth year associate. That's how I'm measuring that. The goal is to make partner. That's typically like an 8 to 10 year track at most law firms. And then there's like equity partners and non-equity partners, or you can be a counsel, and then everything gets more complicated. And I think a little bit more similar to maybe other industries where titles are, very specific to jobs and all of that.
Do people usually change the law firm that they're at, or they usually do they stick to one?
So we call it lateraling when you move. I've moved twice. I moved both times for sort of, I moved to Texas. Like I moved to somewhere where my law firm didn't have an office, and then I moved back to LA. So it was partly geographical. I will tell you now, I do like hiring right where I'm looking. If someone's like skipping around every 2 to 3 years, it tends to be like maybe there's something going on, like you don't know for sure, which I'm sure happens in other industries. But I would say it's not uncommon to switch, but there are also plenty of people that will even use like homegrown, like when people make partner and they've been at the firm the whole time versus like coming in laterally. At the partner level, you see a lot more of like, especially at some of the big law firms, of like groups moving. There's like sort of like you're with maybe the same group of people, but you get poached by some other law firm. There's a lot of that stuff that happens once you get into sort of groups of partners. They'd take their associates with them. And so those people would have switched firms, but like not because they were changing their job, just because they were changing who they were working under.
I have a question on like a completely different topic. So like, I feel like Claire's getting so much advice on her future legal career. I feel like I don't want to stop, but something I am curious about, like, so In thinking about like how we got to Caltech, you and I, Christine, are almost polar opposites in our experience with Caltech before going. Because like I grew up in Indiana. I don't think I knew about Caltech at all until my junior year. But both of your parents went to Caltech. So you probably just like grew up with it, right? So as you decided to go to Caltech and you went to Caltech, growing up with it shaped your Caltech experience. Like, did you kind of go in with certain expectations? You felt like there were expectations on you, and like, how did you navigate that?
I feel like most people don't know what Caltech. I mean, like that's how I always felt. Like it's like people know or they really don't know. And yeah, like why would it's such a small school in a sense, but also is obviously such a unique place and has such impact on the science community and all that. When I was in high school early on, I wanted to, I declared that I was going to major in like languages. At one point, which maybe this then becomes me, just like I flip flop all over the place. And then I'm like, oh, I'm going to go to Caltech. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to be a lawyer. But I've stuck with the last one at least. For my parents, it came as a little bit of a surprise because I had kind of had this attitude early on that like, oh, I don't know where, like I would go to a liberal arts school or like something and like study, I guess also so that I sound less crazy in my defense. My parents did a sabbatical. They're professors. They have PhDs. We did a sabbatical in Germany when I was a kid. So I had been fluent in German and it was taking French. So that was kind of, I think, where that came from. So then I decided, I really want to do math and was applying to schools. And I applied to the UCs and I applied to other Ivy Leagues. And then I applied to Caltech and MIT. And in my Caltech essay, there was a why Caltech. I don't know if they still have that. And I did talk about kind of my parents talking about it. It's hard for me to remember and separate my memories with like what I knew before I went. But what I do remember is Caltech, the letter came almost first. It's like you hear from the school before other schools. And I got in and I was so excited. And my parents were kind of like, oh, do you think you might actually go there? And I just have this memory of my dad, like me sitting there with the letter and my dad being like, Christine, it's very hard. And that was, I think, all he said. But he was like, I think from their perspective, they didn't know like how much they wanted to encourage me, but they also kind of wanted to have some sort of like realism around it. My dad is a math professor and has always been kind of very dedicated. Like he is extremely passionate. He will never retire. All he does is math and all he does is think about his research, and that it will never be something he stops doing, which is definitely not how I felt about anything I worked on at school or even now. I like my job, but I don't plan to do it for literally forever. My mom's experience at Caltech, she was the fourth class of women. And I think, and she was also the first, her dad didn't go to college. She was the first person in her family to go to college. She got a perfect score on the SATs and a full ride, but was working, the entire way through school. She values the experience, but I think it was very difficult for her. But, it was funny. It was my dad was the one that was like, it's really hard. Like, it's going to be very hard. It's going to be much harder than, another school if you pick a different school. And then while I was there, they were very supportive. I remember thinking when I was pivoting to law that they were going to be unhappy. They probably could tell that there wasn't something that I really wanted to do. And I wonder if in some sense it was much better because, I can't imagine if they'd had to be like, we think you shouldn't do a PhD. We don't think that's going to be a good fit for you. Right? Like maybe that conversation would have been harder. I don't know what they would have said because I think they were also, there's difficulties in that route too.
Yeah, I guess if your dad leaned in and said, a PhD is really, really, really hard.
And also then you might not get a postdoc. It's like all of the yeah. When my little sister, who's 7 or 8 years younger than me, was applying to schools, I didn't want her to go to Caltech, especially that soon after graduating. That I really wanted her to go somewhere where she was going to be supported in a way that I saw maybe people not necessarily get that support at the school. And as much as it was such a formative experience for me, where I think that it really, really helped me, even though my career is so different than the average career. And I do think it's such a special place. I remember feeling that way. But me and my dad were aligned on we wanted to go to MIT or Harvard, not Caltech, which is such a funny statement.
I'm thinking if my sister, she's 6 years younger than me, if she was like, Claire, I got into Caltech, I'm going to be just like you, I think my heart would drop. I think my life would flash before my eyes a little bit. I haven't even started my junior year and I feel like I've seen all the terrors. I don't think I'd wish that upon my fragile sister that has so much life still in her eyes.
Actually, speaking of that, so like Christine, when your dad told you Caltech's going to be very hard, you felt like that kind of lived up to expectations. Like, do you felt like he gave you a good sense of that? Was it harder? Was it easier?
I had no idea what to expect, right? Like I just know what he meant. I think probably the advantage of my parents having gone to Caltech was mostly just they had so much more awareness of like they'd gone through core, right? Like it hadn't actually changed that much. Even the class names were kind of the same. And so I think that was probably more them having the ability to talk to me about it or to listen to me talk about it and maybe not have, I had done very well in high school in math and like I got, once we were off pass fail, I got like a C in physics, I think, my freshman year. And so like not having the reaction of like, oh my God, like, oh my God, now you're getting C's or something. That was probably almost the biggest advantage of them having gone there. I feel like, Caltech was definitely more difficult than law school and is probably easily intellectually the most difficult thing I've done. It's the only comparison to like the hours that you work. I don't know that I manage my time that well. Maybe sort of part of the culture. The only thing that's similar now in the sense of like just sheer hours is it is like trial is that way in some senses, like especially when you're more junior and you're like prepping things you actually do, like people pull all-nighters but it's this very intense like team collaborative experience that just in the environment, not in the subject matter or even the way that you're working on things, but just the sort of like it does remind me a little bit of working on like problem sets and sort of that feeling of like late working with people. But still, yeah, Caltech is far more difficult.
Who's scared of 4 grad level physics classes anyways? Not me, for sure.
A funny story for you. My mom, who was a chemistry major, my dad is a math professor and he's like in the far reaches of math. He does what's called set theory, which I'm sure if Caltech people listen to this, someone might know what that is, but he studies infinity. It's like logic. So he convinced my mom to take what was Math 5 her sophomore year or junior year, and then they broke up. And so she determinedly stuck through it as a chemistry major, but had only signed up for it because her boyfriend like convinced her to take it and promised. They got back together. Obviously, they got married, but I always thought that was funny. Just got a funny idea of romance.
I think it's a great story. I think that shows a lot of determination.
I wonder, I'm trying to think of, I didn't date that much at Caltech, but like, I don't know if a significant other could have convinced me to like take a course, particularly in a option that wasn't my own option. Like that's impressive.
Like, Math 5 is like a well-known hard class too.
I was trying to remember if 5 isn't real analysis.
5 is abstract algebra. 108 is real analysis.
Actually, in my whole story, it was 108 because then I was taking 108 and my mom was like, let me tell you a story about real analysis. You tutored a group of us, I remember, in the library, like actually tutored us.
I didn't convince you to take it though. I assume it was an ACM requirement, right? Yeah. I wouldn't.
You're not responsible for us taking it. I just remember being frustrated because really did like ACM 95, which is complex analysis. And then real analysis turns out.
It's not nearly as nice, is it? Yeah, it's grungier.
It'll be more complex, but it's all a trick.
So to tie it all up, what is a funny story of when you were at Caltech?
Besides Mason teaching us all 108.
Was it funny at the time?
Funny at the time? I don't know. I really enjoyed my senior year. We painted the Fleming cannon blue, and that was really fun. I was in Page. We ate donuts on the roof. I was not involved in the painting, but I remember eating donuts on the roof after people had done it and watching, and it was very fun and very kind of quintessential Caltech, I felt like. I will say, though, the tutoring of real analysis, it reminded me of, I've used this story to sort of explain Caltech compared to law school. I don't remember if this was in 108 or in another class, but we were working on a problem set and had spent almost all night on it. There were like problems we still didn't understand. I would go to sleep for a little bit and like wake back up or whatever. And at the time, there was a guy the year below me who was taking the class as well. He was a math major and was very, very smart. And I was the only one awake from this group that had been working on it. And he was like, Christine, I've got it, I think. And then on the door of my room, he solved it. And I like provided, a sounding board. And the whole rest of it, I just remember him afterwards being like, Christine and I got it. You guys were all sleeping. Christine and I got it. Christine and I got it. And I felt like it's very emblematic of the school in the sense that like when I would use it to talk about why Caltech was difficult versus law school, I was like, I was never going to get that. But also it shows some of the like times where you learn how to work with people and you learn from people who are so much smarter than you. And then a lot of times they're so gracious and they're like, Christine and I did it. I'm like, I was there. But so those are my funny stories.
I am very thankful that you're here for the podcast. I have personally learned a lot. This podcast is actually all for me to learn other career paths. So thank you for really supporting me in that. And thank you for being on the podcast.
Thanks, guys.
And that's all we have for the podcast today. Thank you so much for tuning in to hear our talk with the fabulous lawyer, Christine. And I hope you tune in next time.
Life After Caltech is brought to you by Claire Ellison, Riley Kwong, and Mason Smith, with additional production help by Paula Viganalan. The music is called Get Ready to Win by Pamela Yuen from the Free Music Archive under the Creative Commons license. Life After Caltech is in no way affiliated with or approved by the California Institute of Technology or any relevant associations. Thanks for listening.